Far in the reaches of space, the alien research vessel glided through the cosmos. The crew, made up of highly intelligent beings, had explored countless worlds, uncovering mysteries and studying the various species inhabiting them. They had visited planets covered in toxic atmospheres, others engulfed by violent storms, and some with freezing cold that even their advanced technology couldn't survive. But all their travels had led them to one question: what makes a species truly resilient? The answer, they thought, could be found on a small, seemingly insignificant planet: Earth. At first glance, Earth seemed like any other planet. It was full of life, but the species that lived there were fragile, barely advanced compared to the rest of the galaxy. The aliens had spent little time studying the planet, but as they scrolled through data from their scans, they noticed something odd. Earth's creatures, especially humans, had an unusual ability. They survived in the harshest environments, places that would break down any other species. One of the researchers, a curious alien by the name of Naira, was intrigued. She had spent her entire career studying survival tactics and extreme conditions, but nothing in her previous experiences had prepared her for the reports coming from Earth. The humans weren't just surviving, they were thriving. While other planets had species that avoided harsh environments, the humans actively sought them out. Extreme heat? They built machines and structures to live in it. Freezing cold? Humans ventured into ice-covered regions and stayed alive with nothing but their willpower. Even toxic air. Humans learned to survive in it by creating filters and advanced suits. Naira found this resilience fascinating. She was determined to learn why humans were so different from the other species they had studied. Naira gathered a team of researchers, and together, they began their mission. At first, their goal was simple: observe. The team was tasked with watching humans endure what the aliens had categorized as Class 13 conditions, environments so extreme they would typically destroy life in minutes. Class 13 conditions were the pinnacle of environmental danger. Toxic air, violent weather patterns, and extreme temperatures all together formed an environment that no life form should survive. The aliens' mission was to document how humans managed to endure these conditions, but as they observed, they began to question their initial assumptions. The humans didn't just survive, they seemed to be thriving, pushing their limits as if the extreme conditions were a challenge. It was as if the more difficult the situation, the more determined they became. One day, Naira's team found a group of humans who were preparing for a survival exercise in a desert, one of Earth's most punishing environments. The temperature was well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sun was beating down relentlessly. The humans, dressed in light clothing to cope with the heat, had set up their camp and were preparing to spend the night out in the open. To Naira's astonishment, these humans weren't huddling for shelter or retreating to air-conditioned homes. Instead, they were running, exercising, and challenging each other to push their bodies beyond what seemed physically possible. "They must be insane," Naira muttered, staring at the footage. "No one should be able to withstand this kind of heat without protection," her colleagues agreed. "Perhaps they have technology that protects them," one suggested, but as Naira observed closer, she realized the humans weren't using any special devices. They had no shields or advanced suits. They were relying on their physical strength and mental determination. They were pushing themselves for fitness. The idea seemed absurd to the alien researchers. Why would anyone willingly endure such extreme heat unless it was for something greater? Naira, eager to understand more, reached out to one of the humans. She communicated with them using a universal translator, introducing herself as an observer from another planet. The human, a middle-aged man named James, was surprised to see a talking alien, but seemed unfazed by the encounter. His calm demeanor only added to Naira's intrigue. "Why do you do this?" Naira asked. "Why put yourselves through such conditions?" James looked at her with a puzzled expression, as if the answer was obvious. "For fitness," he said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Naira didn't understand. Fitness? What did fitness have to do with surviving a hostile environment? She had seen hundreds of species throughout her travels, but none had ever pushed themselves in such a manner. Most beings on other planets avoided hardship, using technology. to protect themselves. But the humans, they seemed to embrace it. James continued, "It's not just about surviving. It's about becoming stronger. We believe that by enduring tough environments we grow, not just physically but mentally as well. It's about testing our limits, pushing through pain and discomfort. It makes us better." Naira's mind raced. She had seen species that trained for strength, but never like this. Never in these conditions. She recorded the conversation, fascinated by the humans' attitude. Back on the alien ship, Naira and her team analyzed the data. They were all stunned by the human drive for physical improvement. The alien species they had studied in the past had all relied on technology to survive. But here were humans, surviving in what they called Class 13 conditions, simply because they believed it would make them stronger. The aliens began to see Earth in a new light. These humans weren't just resilient, they were a force to be reckoned with. It was more than survival, it was a way of life. A belief that physical and mental strength could be attained only by facing the toughest challenges, not avoiding them. Naira, who had never experienced human strength, found herself both amazed and intimidated by their resilience. She realized that she had underestimated these creatures, and for the first time, she began to understand why humans had the reputation they did across the galaxy. They didn't just survive, they dominated adversity. And this discovery was just the beginning. After the first encounter with James, Naira and her team found themselves questioning everything they had known about the human species. Humans, it seemed, were far more complex than they had first imagined. Their willingness to endure extreme conditions for the sake of fitness was something that the aliens had never encountered before. Naira couldn't stop thinking about what James had said. It's about becoming stronger. She spent the next several days observing more humans in various environments. She watched as they ran through harsh deserts, swam in icy lakes, and climbed mountains in sub-zero temperatures. Each time they pushed themselves harder. Every obstacle seemed to motivate them further, as if the challenge was their reason for being. The aliens had created a simulation to test what they had learned. They knew that to understand the human drive fully, they would need to replicate the conditions these humans were subjecting themselves to. The simulation was set to the most extreme, a Class 13 environment, where temperatures reached unbearable highs and radiation levels were dangerously high. It was a place where most species would have perished almost instantly. As Naira prepared the simulation, her thoughts kept returning to James. What drove him? What motivated him to put himself through such conditions when most species would turn away in fear? She had to know more. The simulation began, and a group of humans volunteered to enter the Class 13 environment. These humans were not the elite or specially trained athletes the aliens had expected. They were everyday people, teachers, workers, students, and even the elderly. They had come not because they were forced, but because they believed in the challenge. They were here to test themselves. Naira watched them closely as they entered the simulation. At first, they seemed to struggle. The heat was unbearable, and the radiation burned their skin. But within minutes, they adapted. Their bodies, though, clearly suffering, found a rhythm. They didn't stop. They didn't back down. They kept moving forward, not out of necessity, but because they wanted to prove to themselves that they could. One woman, Clara, stood out. She was an older human, her face weathered by years of life, yet she had the determination of someone much younger. Naira couldn't help but focus on her. As Clara struggled through the simulated heat, she showed no signs of slowing down. Her body trembled, and sweat poured from her face, but her eyes remained focused. She moved steadily, as if the harsh environment were just another obstacle to overcome. Naira was stunned. The aliens had never seen anything like it. Clara wasn't fighting to survive. She wasn't even trying to escape the environment. She was embracing it, pushing herself harder with every step. To Naira, it was as if Clara had transformed into something more than just a human. She had become a symbol of pure resilience. Naira's curiosity grew even stronger. She activated a direct communication link with the humans in the simulation. She wanted to ask Clara, "Why do you do this?" Clara paused for a moment and wiped the sweat from her brow before answering, her voice calm, despite the obvious exhaustion. "Because life is about more than just surviving. It's about living. When you challenge yourself like this, you learn more than just strength. You learn what you're made of. You push through the pain, and that makes you better. Stronger." Naira replayed the words in her mind. You learn what you're made of. There it was again. This human drive to push past limits, to thrive in adversity, not simply endure. Clara's words held a deeper meaning. It wasn't about proving something to others. It was about proving something to oneself, to be the best version of who they could be. The simulation continued, and Naira's observations revealed even more astonishing facts. The humans were not only surviving the extreme conditions, they were thriving in them. Their bodies seemed to adapt in ways that went beyond mere physical endurance. Their minds, too, seemed to become stronger. Their focus sharpened, and their spirits remained unbroken, even as their bodies endured the worst of the simulation. One by one, the humans emerged from the simulation, covered in sweat and dirt, but smiling. They had done it. They had completed the Class 13 challenge. Some were exhausted, their faces red from the heat, but there was a look of satisfaction in their eyes. They had not just survived. They had conquered the impossible. Naira was left speechless. She had watched entire species fail in similar tests, species that were far more advanced than humans. But these humans? They had done something that seemed beyond comprehension. They didn't rely on technology or advanced equipment to survive. They relied on their determination, their will, and their belief that they could overcome anything. Naira and her team gathered in a debriefing room, discussing what they had witnessed. The data was overwhelming. The humans had surpassed all expectations, and the aliens couldn't explain how they had done it. They had expected to see the humans collapse under the strain, but instead, they had watched them grow stronger both physically and mentally. Why did they do it? One of the researchers asked. Why put themselves through all that pain and suffering? Naira paused, her mind racing with the possibilities. I think they do it because it's not about survival for them. It's about something deeper. It's about proving to themselves that they can face the worst conditions and come out on top. It's about pushing past their limits to become better versions of themselves. The team nodded in agreement, but there was still a lingering question in Naira's mind. How could a species that seemed so fragile in comparison to others be so resilient in the face of adversity? She had come to Earth expecting to study a species that barely survived, but instead, she had found a species that thrived in the most unimaginable conditions. The aliens had underestimated humans, and now, they realized they had uncovered something truly extraordinary. After witnessing the humans' incredible performance in the simulation, Naira couldn't help but feel a shift in her understanding of their species. What had begun as an experiment, designed to explore the limits of human survival, had turned into something far deeper. The humans had done more than survive. They had embraced the challenge. Each one of them had entered the Class 13 simulation willingly, not for survival, but for the opportunity to push their limits and prove their own strength. Over the next few days, Naira and her team continued to study the humans. They wanted to know more about why they were so determined to endure hardship. The aliens had expected to see fear or weakness, but instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. Humans who not only accepted pain and struggle, but seemed to thrive in it. The data was puzzling. No species that Naira had studied before had shown this kind of resilience without some form of physical or technological advantage. Naira decided to go deeper. She reached out to the human volunteers who had participated in the simulation, hoping to learn more about their mindset. She wanted to understand what drove them to push through the worst conditions imaginable. Her first conversation was with Marcus, the young man who had run through the heat without hesitation. When asked why he had volunteered, he answered without any doubt. I do it because I want to see how far I can go, Marcus said, his eyes shining with determination. I want to know what I'm made of. You don't know your limits until you push yourself to them. It was a simple answer, but it carried so much weight. To the humans, the test wasn't just about surviving. It was about discovering their true potential. The harder the challenge, the greater the reward. This was something Nira hadn't expected. In her own culture, challenges were avoided unless absolutely necessary. Yet these humans actively sought them out, using hardship not just as a means of survival, but as a way to grow stronger. As Nira continued to speak with the humans, she began to notice a pattern. Many of them shared the same belief, that real growth could only come from enduring difficulty. One woman, Maya, a fitness coach, explained it in simple terms. "When you're comfortable, you're not growing," Maya said, her voice steady. "Growth happens when you're uncomfortable, when you push past your limits. Pain is part of the process. It's what makes you better." Nira listened carefully, struck by the humans' consistent view of hardship as a path to improvement. They didn't fear discomfort. They saw it as a necessary part of life, something to be embraced. This wasn't just about physical strength, it was about mental strength too. The humans were building resilience not just in their bodies, but in their minds. Their will to endure was just as important as their physical endurance. As Nira reflected on this, she realized that the humans were teaching her something important. She had spent her entire life studying other species, analyzing their strengths and weaknesses. But she had never encountered a species like this, one that turned hardship into strength and saw challenges as opportunities for growth. The humans' spirit was something Nira had never experienced before. It was something she now deeply admired. The more Nira observed, the more she began to feel that the humans' strength came from within. It wasn't just about surviving the Class 13 conditions. It was about how they approached life itself. The way they faced obstacles, not with fear, but with the knowledge that they could overcome anything, was what set them apart from every other species the aliens had encountered. It wasn't about physical power. It was about the mindset, the refusal to back down in the face of adversity. One evening, Nira gathered her team to discuss what they had learned. The data from the simulations was astonishing, but it was the humans' attitude that had truly fascinated them all. They had entered the simulations willingly, endured unimaginable hardship, and emerged not only alive, but proud of their achievements. It was a mindset the aliens had never seen before. "We've learned something we didn't expect," Nira said to her colleagues. "These humans, they're not just surviving. They are thriving. They take hardship and turn it into strength. They push past their limits because they believe they can. It's not just about survival for them. It's about proving to themselves that they are capable of anything." Reiner, one of the lead researchers, nodded slowly. "It's as if they found a way to transform suffering into something meaningful. Other species would have collapsed under these conditions, but the humans, they find purpose in it." Nira's thoughts lingered on what Reiner had said. The humans had found purpose in their suffering. That was what made them unique. That was what made them strong. It wasn't just about surviving harsh conditions. It was about using those conditions to grow, to become more than they were before. The more Nira thought about it, the more she realized that the humans weren't just enduring Class 13 conditions. They were rewriting the definition of strength. They were teaching the galaxy a valuable lesson. Strength isn't just about power. It's about resilience, willpower, and the ability to keep going even when everything around you seems impossible. In the days that followed, Nira couldn't help but admire the humans more and more. She had come to Earth expecting to study a primitive species, one barely able to survive in the harsh conditions of their planet. Instead, she had found a species with an inner strength that defied logic. Humans didn't just survive, they turned hardship into a tool for growth. They embraced it. They used it to push themselves beyond their limits and become better versions of themselves. Nira knew that this discovery would change everything. The humans were not what she had expected. They were something far greater, and the universe was about to learn just how extraordinary they truly were. This part focuses on the growing understanding that the human's strength goes beyond physical endurance. It's about their mindset and how they view challenges as opportunities for growth. The story continues in simple, engaging language, ensuring it remains violation-free and easy to follow. Days turned into weeks as Naira and her team continued to study the humans. They had already learned so much, but there was still one key question that lingered in Naira's mind. Why do humans push themselves so hard? The answer, she had come to realize, wasn't as simple as a desire for strength or survival. It was about something deeper. But what exactly was that? To dig deeper, Naira decided to take her research to the next level. She had the humans participate in a more challenging simulation, this time designed to push them beyond their limits. The simulation was meant to test not just their physical endurance, but their mental and emotional resilience as well. Naira had a theory. If humans could handle such extreme conditions, could they also handle an environment that tested their very sense of self? The simulation was set up to be brutal. The temperature would reach unbearable levels, the atmosphere filled with toxins, and the pressure was enough to make most species buckle. However, there was a twist. The humans wouldn't know when the simulation would end. They would have to trust their instincts, their bodies, and their minds to push through the unknown. As the simulation began, Naira watched closely. The humans, as expected, entered the environment without hesitation. The heat immediately began to rise, and the air became thick with toxic gases. The conditions were as extreme as they could be. Naira had expected them to struggle, to show signs of weakness, but they didn't. At first, everything went according to plan. The humans were clearly suffering, but they didn't slow down. They pressed on through the unbearable heat, determined to finish the task. But then something unexpected happened. One of the humans, a young man named Leo, started to stumble. His breath became shallow, his steps unsure. He collapsed to his knees, his face contorted in pain. Naira watched in silence, her heart racing. This wasn't part of the plan. She had seen humans push themselves to the limit, but this was different. Leo was clearly in agony. Would he give up? Would he fail the test? To Naira's surprise, Leo didn't give up. Despite the pain, despite his body begging for relief, he managed to rise to his feet. His eyes were filled with determination. Slowly, painfully, he began moving again. The other humans, noticing Leo's struggle, rallied around him. They didn't leave him behind. They didn't criticize or panic. They helped him, encouraging him to keep going. "Come on, Leo," one of them shouted, her voice full of energy. "You can do it. We're in this together." It was a simple statement, but it was enough to fuel Leo's resolve. He took another step, then another. The humans around him didn't just continue their own journey. They supported him. Together, they faced the impossible, each one drawing strength from the others. Naira watched in awe. She had never seen anything like it before. The humans weren't just surviving the extreme conditions. They were supporting each other, lifting each other up when one of them faltered. The bond they shared was something unique, something that transcended mere physical strength. It was the power of community, the strength of human connection. As the simulation continued, Naira realized something important. It wasn't just the individuals that made humans strong. It was their ability to work together. No one person could have made it through the simulation alone. But together, they were unstoppable. They faced the hardest challenges with unity, knowing that no one had to suffer alone. Their strength came not only from within, but from the bonds they forged with one another. Eventually, the simulation ended. The humans, exhausted and battered, emerged from the harsh environment. Leo was the last to leave, his legs shaking from the effort, but his spirit unbroken. As he stepped out, he was greeted with cheers and claps from the others. They had made it through together. Naira was speechless. She had watched entire species collapse under less pressure. Yet here were these humans, who not only survived but thrived in the face of extreme adversity. They had proven something extraordinary. Not just their physical resilience, but their ability to rely on one another, to draw strength from each other in the hardest of times. The humans, though physically exhausted, stood tall, their faces filled with pride. They hadn't just completed the challenge, they had done it as a team. Naira now understood why they pushed themselves so hard. It wasn't just about personal growth. It was about building something greater. It was about proving to themselves that no matter how hard life got, they would always have each other. As Naira reflected on everything she had witnessed, she couldn't help but feel a deep respect for these creatures. The humans had shown her a new way of thinking, one that didn't rely on individual strength alone, but on the power of unity and support. They had demonstrated that no obstacle was insurmountable when faced together. "I've learned something I never expected," Naira said quietly to Reiner, who was standing beside her. "Humans are not just resilient. They are united. Their strength is in their community, in their connection to each other." Reiner nodded thoughtfully. "It's something we've never seen before. A species that relies on each other so completely, in a way that strengthens them all. It's extraordinary." Naira's mind was racing. She had come to Earth expecting to study a species that was fragile and easily broken. Instead, she had discovered a species that, though physically small, was capable of so much more. The humans' strength didn't lie in their bodies, but in their hearts and minds, and most importantly, in their connections to each other. As the alien researchers prepared to leave Earth, they knew they had learned a valuable lesson. The humans had proven that true strength came not from surviving the harshest conditions, but from standing together and facing them head-on. And this lesson, Naira realized, was something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. The days following the simulation were filled with reflection. Naira and her team spent hours discussing the results of the latest experiment. They had watched the humans push themselves past their limits, showing not just physical endurance but also remarkable mental strength. It was clear now that the humans were not like other species. They were different, something more than just survivors. They were driven by a unique combination of inner strength and the power of connection. As Naira reviewed the data, she found herself thinking back to the words of Clara, the older woman who had led her group through the simulation. "We push ourselves because we want to become stronger." Those words echoed in Naira's mind. The humans didn't seek comfort or safety. They didn't try to avoid hardship. Instead, they sought out challenges to test their abilities, to grow, and to become better versions of themselves. Naira couldn't help but wonder why other species in the galaxy didn't share this drive. Why did the humans seek difficulty and pain when other species sought comfort and ease? What made them so different? She began to realize that it wasn't just about physical strength or survival. It was about their belief in themselves, in their own ability to overcome anything that came their way. One evening, as Naira walked through the observation room, she saw Leo again, the young man who had struggled during the simulation. He was sitting quietly in a corner, sipping water and talking with the others. His face was still flushed from the effort, but there was a sense of calm about him. The others gathered around him, laughing and joking, as though the grueling simulation had never happened. But Naira saw it differently. There was something in their eyes, a sense of shared purpose, a bond that went beyond the physical. Naira approached Leo and asked, "How do you feel now after everything?" Leo looked up at her and smiled. "I feel accomplished. Tired, but accomplished. We pushed ourselves to the edge, and we didn't give up." Naira nodded, impressed by his calm demeanor. "What do you think you learned from this?" Leo thought for a moment before responding. "I learned that strength isn't just about how much you can lift or how fast you can run. It's about how much you're willing to endure. It's about your mind, your will to keep going when everything in you wants to quit." His words struck Naira deeply. She had heard many different philosophies from various species, but none had resonated with her as much as this. The humans didn't focus on avoiding hardship. They focused on facing it head-on, knowing that the challenges they encountered would shape them into something stronger. After the conversation with Leo, Naira went back to the observation room, determined to understand the humans better. She began analyzing their behavior in different environments. She watched as they interacted with each other, helping, encouraging, and lifting one another up. There was no competition among them, no sense of rivalry. Instead, they worked together, pushing each other to be better. In every environment, whether it was the harsh desert or a freezing mountain peak, they demonstrated the same spirit: resilience, unity, and a shared determination to grow stronger. Naira was beginning to understand that the humans' strength wasn't just about their bodies. It was about their mindset and the relationships they built with one another. The stronger their bond, the more powerful they became. And that was something no technology or weapon could replicate. It was a kind of strength that was born from within. The more Naira thought about it, the more she realized that the humans had something the galaxy had never seen before. They had the ability to turn pain and struggle into fuel for their growth. They had the power to face the most difficult challenges and come out stronger on the other side. But more than that, they had the strength to support each other through those challenges, to share in the experience, and to rise together. As Naira prepared to leave Earth, she felt a deep sense of respect for the humans. She had come to their planet expecting to study a weak species, one that was struggling to survive. But instead, she had discovered something far more profound. Humans weren't just surviving. They were evolving, constantly pushing themselves to be better, to be stronger, to be more than they had ever been before. When Naira and her team gathered to discuss their findings, she couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The humans had taught them something valuable. They had shown them that true strength came not from power or technology, but from the will to face hardship, to endure, and to rise above it. The human strength came from their spirit, their resilience, and their unwavering belief that they could overcome anything. "I've learned something incredible," Naira said, addressing her team. "These humans are unlike anything we've seen before. They don't just survive, they evolve. They face challenges not with fear, but with determination. Their strength isn't just physical, it's mental and emotional. They rely on each other, and that makes them even stronger." Reiner, one of her fellow researchers, nodded. "It's not just about physical endurance, it's about how they handle adversity, how they turn pain into growth." Naira agreed. "We've witnessed something extraordinary. These humans will change the way we view strength. They have the power to face anything and keep going. And that's something we must learn from." As the team prepared to leave Earth, Naira looked out at the planet below. She had come to Earth expecting to find a weak species, one that could barely survive the harsh conditions of their planet. But what she had found was something far more remarkable. The humans had shown her the true meaning of strength. It wasn't about how much you could lift or how fast you could run. It was about your will to keep going when everything in you wanted to quit. It was about the strength to endure, to face challenges head-on, and to rise above them. And with that realization, Naira knew that the humans had something that no other species in the galaxy had: the strength of the human spirit. In this final part, the story emphasizes the lesson Naira learns from the humans' unique resilience and teamwork. It showcases the power of unity and the human spirit, highlighting how true strength lies not just in physical ability, but in perseverance and support for one another. The story concludes with Naira's respect for the humans and the lasting impact their strength will have on her.